Ruth Langsford and Eamonn Holmes spent a good 14 years together. They appeared stable, recognizable, and nearly impenetrable to the general public. However, everything collapsed in 2024, and the marriage silently ended. The story appeared to be resolved once they parted ways. We've heard Ruth's side ever since. Her version determined how people perceived the breakup, dominated the headlines, and created the narrative. Eamonn said nothing. Up until today, there have been no interviews, explanations, or objections. Eamonn Holmes is finally speaking up at the age of 66, and his words alter the atmosphere. It alters the appearance of the split and, more significantly, Ruth Langsford's subsequent appearance. What precisely was said by Eamonn Holmes, then? And why did he hold off on sharing his side of the tale for so long? Come along as we go into every detail. Eamonn Holmes, the ascent, the quiet, and the untold tale. Eamonn Holmes was just a Belfast youngster learning how to hold a room long before the headlines, the breakups, and the well-crafted statements. Holy Family Primary School, St. Malachy's College, and Dublin College of Business Studies were his first educational institutions. That route didn't shout famous. It did imply routine, discipline, and an early familiarity with structure. And that would be important in the future because Holmes' entire career was built on his ability to be trusted in the face of life's unpredictability and chaos. When he joined Ulster Television in 1979 as a teenage reporter and presenter on Farming Ulster, it was his first significant break. Although it wasn't national or glamorous, it was authentic broadcasting. He learned how to think quickly and interact with people without acting in front of them. He then effortlessly transitioned into sports reporting, working with seasoned reporters and picking up live television skills the hard way through pressure and repetition. By 1982, Ulster Television had enough faith in him to give him the anchor's chair on their main news show, Good Evening Ulster. It was a silent but important vote of confidence, and he was taking over a position that had been held by Gloria Hunnford. Holmes was no longer merely a script reader. He was establishing the tone, influencing discussions, and becoming well-known in Northern Irish households. He wasn't only about news. He demonstrated his ability to switch between serious and light-hearted situations without losing credibility by hosting pageants, specials, and live events. It was a promotion more than an escape when he left Ulster Television to work for the BBC in 1986. He joined BBC One's Open Air in Manchester, where he broadcast nationwide and discovered what it meant to address millions of people rather than just thousands. Then came the moment that made all the difference. Holmes joined GMTV in 1993 and assisted in the company's inaugural broadcast. Morning TV is harsh. When the rest of the nation is only half awake, you are supposed to be alert, live, and early. There, Holmes flourished. His voice lulled folks into the day and became a part of their routines. He remained rooted in the role even as problems arose behind the scenes, including a well-publicized falling out with Anthea Turner. He didn't leave GMTV peacefully when he eventually did so in 2005. He made it apparent that the program had veered too much towards celebrity fluff and away from actual reporting. He was followed by that honesty. After being brought in to front Sunrise by Sky News 6 months later, Holmes once more became accustomed to the early morning routine, switching around co-hosts but maintaining a consistent, conversational tone. He became as one of the most adaptable presenters on television at this time. Games include jet set, snooker, darts, horse racing, tennis, quiz shows, panel shows, and faith programming like praise hymns. He sought consistency rather than prestige. Holmes embraced his strengths, making live television feel safe and natural, even when he joined This Morning in 2006. When he started doing presentations with Ruth Langsford, that strategy peaked. They were simple, recognizable, and convincing on screen. They turned their real-life relationship into a television brand by fronting shows like Gift Wrapped and Eamonn and Ruth, How the Other Half Lives. It seemed natural to the audience. It became inextricably linked to Holmes's public image. However, the sector was evolving behind the scenes. Holmes was obliged to publicly defend both his contract and his worth after he lost a tribunal hearing in 2020 regarding his freelance status under IR 35 guidelines. He referred to himself as one of the nation's top live presenters, and there was no denying the confidence, whether or not people agreed. His other lane had always been radio. Holmes viewed radio as a place where he could talk more, delve deeper, and be less polished, starting with downtown radio in the late 1980s and continuing with Radio 5 Live, Magic 105.4, Radio 2, and eventually talk radio. That was where his views were most obvious, where he was heard by audiences without being filtered by studio lighting. He started a breakfast show with Isabel Webster on GB News around 2022. He characterized it as a place where he felt valued once more, where journalism was prioritized, and where regulations could be loosened just enough to make the discussion genuine. And now, after decades of being the man who was always there, always dependable, and rarely gave an explanation, Holmes is speaking once more, as a man at last emerging from behind them, rather than as a presenter reciting headlines. And the narrative doesn't continue after he does. It relates to the period of his life that was always kept under wraps, long before the cameras, the commentary, and the requirement to provide any kind of explanation. Ruth and Eamonn. The intimate romance that failed to hold up in the public eye. The romance between Eamonn and Ruth did not start out as a public affair. As a television pairing intended for viewers to fall in love with, it started slowly, purposefully, almost carefully, at a time when timing and moderation were more important than thrills. There was no rush to identify or declare their identities to the public when Eamonn Holmes and Ruth Langsford first met in 1997 through their mutual acquaintance Sally Mean. 2 years prior, Holmes had split from Gabrielle, his first wife, and the choice to keep the connection covert was decided early on. It's out of respect, not secrecy. Additionally, that decision, which was made long before cameras followed them everywhere, subtly established the tone for everything that came after. When they did begin dating, their relationship remained completely private. Years later, Langsford would reflect on that time and say that her affections for Holmes were further strengthened by his demand on secrecy. It demonstrated his character, his aspirations as a father, and the degree of integrity he carried into his personal life, she thought. It gave her a sense of security rather than concealment. It took them 2 years to go public, but by then, their bond had solidified. After that, things happened fast. When they welcomed their son, Jack, in 2002, their entire world subtly shifted. Later, Langsford disclosed that the day before her godson Charlie's christening, she found out she was expecting. She first broke the news to Charlie's mother, Sam, her best friend, when Holmes was abroad. It was a private, confidential moment. One of those life moments that can have a big impact without the presence of witnesses. Even without Holmes, she would later say it was a very special time spent together. Their personal and professional lives started to completely merge by 2006. Holmes joined Langsford on the Friday edition of This Morning, 9 years into their romance. Having been a regular since 1999, Langsford has already established himself as the show's longest-running presenter. They didn't pretend that working side by side was simple. Langsford freely confessed that there were difficulties when working with a partner, but she also said that they were generally successful. Over time, they became into one of the most well-known collaborations on daytime television. Gift Wrapped, How the Other Half Lives, Lose a Stone in 4 Weeks, Eamonn and Ruth's 7-Year Itch, and Do the Right Thing were all presented by them. The distinction between marriage and brand gradually dissolved as their chemistry became a part of their public persona. At one point, Holmes said that abandoning television was just not an option, leaning into it with a sense of fun, since viewers wouldn't tolerate it. It sounded playful at the moment. Looking back, it seems like a greater commitment than any of them had thought. They were married at Elvetham Hall in Hampshire 5 years after Holmes and Gabriel's divorce was finalized and 13 years after they first met. Soon after, they reportedly paid £3.2 million for a 6-bedroom home in Weybridge, Surrey. It appeared to be the last component fitting into place. Stability, permanence, and success. Years later, Langsford talked about an understanding-based marriage on Strictly Come Dancing. She clarified that Holmes was the first to make fun of her and, equally rapidly, the first to give her a considerate present. She trusted that he fully understood her, even while she was preoccupied with the demands of the competition. She thought that was the reason they worked. Then 2020 arrived, bringing with it a change for which neither of them appeared ready. This Morning quickly fired Holmes and Langsford in November, replacing them with Dermot O'Leary and Alison Hammond. They were incensed with the choice. It was a setback from a professional standpoint. For me, it signaled the start of a pronounced rift. Langsford continued to appear on Loose Women and stayed with ITV. Holmes took a completely different path and became a breakfast host for GB News. Their careers had diverged for the first time in years, and their distance from one another was no longer merely professional. The meticulously preserved hush had finally broken by May 2024. It was confirmed by Holmes and Langsford that they were divorcing and that their marriage was finished. A representative clarified that their marriage had diverged due to work obligations. The message was composed, and well-written. They were committed to remaining friends. In an effort to maintain good relations, they promised their followers an official statement. However, beneath the well-crafted words lay the demise of a partnership that had once been based on tolerance, confidentiality, and a common goal. And there was more going on behind that conclusion. Long before the marriage finally failed, something was wearing them down. Because, despite the fact that the separation was described in a composed and businesslike manner, the pressure had been steadily increasing. Eamonn Holmes was unable to outrun the one location. His own body. Holmes, Eamonn. When the cameras stopped, the suffering continued. The audience witnessed strength for years. They were unaware of the extent to which that strength was borrowed. Behind his recognizable voice and composed on-screen persona, Eamonn Holmes was battling a body that was starting to fail him one part at a time. However, Ruth Langsford remained by his side the entire time, providing encouragement, comfort, and hope. However, those years of illness no longer seem like background noise as their marriage ends and Holmes embarks on a new stage of life by himself. They seem to be the point of pressure at which everything started to change. Holmes has never concealed his health issues. He did, in fact, discuss them frequently, at times with brutal honesty and at other times with humor. His body was already under siege even before the marriage fell apart. After enduring years of excruciating pain, he underwent a 3¼ hour double hip replacement in 2016. He said there were anxiety in the lead up, but none once it started, and compared the experience to live television at the time. He even talked about the bizarre experience of receiving heartfelt tributes the night before surgery, which seemed uncannily similar to saying goodbye without really leaving. There was an odd sense of relief as he woke up and saw his wife, a smiling surgeon, and a lunch menu. It proved he must still be alive, he joked. That sense of humor and the natural desire to perform despite discomfort became a common motif. Then 2018 arrived. On the day of his son Declan's wedding, which was supposed to be a happy occasion for the family, Holmes contracted shingles. His face was bloated, scarred, and unrecognizable due to the infection. He posted pictures of the experience and talked openly about how horrible it was during an appearance on Loose Women years later. He described how, for most individuals, shingles is a dormant condition that can suddenly erupt. He compared himself to Quasimodo as he looked at the pictures on the screen, recognizing the alarming nature of the condition. However, his most catastrophic deterioration began in 2021. Holmes suddenly experienced excruciating back pain that spring that would not go away. He finally needed a walking stick as the agony got worse very quickly. The revelation that altered everything came next. His right leg is unable to move because to 3 slipped discs. The diagnosis did not provide relief, but it did explain the discomfort. By the end of that year, Holmes acknowledged that his illness had severely affected his family as well as himself. He disclosed that he had to rely on Ruth for assistance on days when he was unable to move at all, bend over, or perform simple tasks. He admitted that the manner he moved humiliated his sons, and that the loss of independence was just as difficult as the illness. Even when scans revealed the bulging discs, Holmes assumed the issue would go away on its own. It didn't. Injections of epidurals provided some alleviation, but not a cure. The notion that surgery would be a speedy treatment gradually faded as life became more and more limited. Holmes acknowledged that he was devastated when medical professionals told him that other spinal and nerve problems had to be treated first. He was in excruciating discomfort for a year already and was in dire need of an explanation. He left his GB News show in September 2022 to have necessary spinal surgery. It was supposed to be the pivotal moment. Rather, it paved the way for a more brutal reality. Holmes discovered that his movement was still restricted even after receiving intensive physical therapy. He talked candidly about how it felt soul-destroying to rely on others to complete basic duties. He felt guilty even when he sat still for hours following physiotherapy sessions, as if resting had become an additional burden. His left leg was similarly compromised by the surgery, and calamity struck just over 2 weeks into his recuperation. Holmes slammed into the stone floor below after falling backwards down 18 stairs at his Weybridge house. He might have died in the accident. Rather, he came out with more damage to his already fragile legs and a shattered shoulder. He then acknowledged that the injury was a severe setback that required him to take additional time off from work and reevaluate his objectives. The setbacks continued even after that. In September 2023, a year following the surgery, Holmes publicly acknowledged that he was still unable to walk normally and had a neck and spine stretching procedure. He acknowledged that his limitations were limited to sitting and watching television, as well as the inability to run and move. His rehabilitation wasn't what he had hoped for. It was far from it. By 2024, he was totally focused on getting better. Physiotherapy became a daily. Instances happen the way they do. Although she is highly aware of herself, she acknowledged that treatment has allowed her to handle everything more calmly. Ruth's career has flourished. She has even alluded to a potential comeback to This Morning as her career has taken off. She didn't think twice about presenting with Rylan Clark when invited. She would agree if they asked, especially with Rylan. He is someone she loves, and she called him a TV son, someone with whom she already has a comfortable rhythm. Clearly, the door is not closed. But there have also been lighter times. Men live longer when they're married, while women live longer when they're single, according to a joke made by panelist Mylene Klass at a recent Loose Women discussion regarding the health of former Prime Minister David Cameron. Ruth's response was prompt and insightful. "Good to know," she responded, joining in the audience's laughter. It was playful, short, and sharp enough to land. The relationship hasn't entirely disappeared, though. Eamonn contacted Ruth over Christmas to wish her well and to convey his continued respect. He stated unequivocally that she deserved happiness during a joyous awards dinner. The timing was crucial, even though the words were straightforward. An effort at grace persisted even during the divorce process. Eamonn and Katie stayed at an opulent cottage in North Yorkshire for the Christmas season. He also talked candidly about his aspirations for the future. He acknowledged that getting around is still difficult every day and that he still uses a walking frame. However, by 2026, he hopes to have improved, and he is even thinking of developing a novel stem cell treatment. At least he's still determined. As a result, this chapter concludes with introspection rather than closure. Looking back, a guy acknowledges his unbalance. A lady taking charge and finding her strength. Once running in tandem, two lives are now traveling in different directions. Don't yell. Not a spectacle. Just the burden of everything that is irreversible. What do you think about all that transpired between Ruth and Eamonn? Tell us in the comments section below. Remember to subscribe, like, and share. Click the following video that appears on your screen as well. It will be enjoyable for you.